I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safer.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 269. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. Thank you for those of you who are new to the show, just stumbled upon the show and curious what this is all about. I hope you enjoy today's show and you will come back. Today is another of our variety shows. What we do is every other week we alternate our format. 1 week we do a segment called Clinging to God and Guns, where Pastor John Bennett and myself are the key players, and we discuss topics, or we talk about recent events, or we take an article about gun control or about gun rights, and we dissect it from a Christian perspective. This week is what we call our variety show week, where the entire cast kicks in some content. We've got a Ballistic Minute from Sergeant Bill Sylvia. Bill is a competitive shooter, a masterclass competitive shooter in IDPA and USPSA, and he provides us a tip each week. We also have the Mia's Motivations with Mia Einstein, and Pastoral Pontifications with Pastor John Bennett. This week, unfortunately, we will not have Mia's Motivations. Mia is currently moving, and you know how much fun that is. So keep her and her family in your prayers as they deal with all of that. I'm sure that is not fun, and so Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll have Mia back in a couple of weeks for our next variety show. But before we begin, I do want to take a minute, and I want to thank the awesome men and women who make this show possible, the members of the Reformation Gun Club. The Reformation Gun Club is our membership site, and basically, we don't have any advertising. We are listener funded, and that means we rely on the monthly and yearly contributions of our members, the members of the Reformation Gun Club. We don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. This is really as close as you're going to get to a sponsorship or an advertising message that you'll hear in the entire show. This week, I want to shout out to Dan from Enumclaw, Washington, John from Wheaton, Illinois, Catherine from Casper, Wyoming, Luke over in Seymour, Indiana, Mark up in Woodland, Washington, and Matthew from Nixa, Missouri. Thank you guys for your support, especially during these troubling economic times. We really do appreciate everything you do to help us keep the lights on. Folks, if you would like to be a member of the Reformation Gun Club, there are great benefits for doing so. For as little as $1 a month, you get access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content that has never been released on the podcast. We release extended versions of the shows. We release exclusive audio and video content that is designed specifically for Reformation Gun Club members, including a new podcast that is been running for a few weeks now, specifically for the members. It's called the Reformation Gun Club Good Time Happy Hour. I know it's a funny name, but we sit down with, it's a lighthearted show with we sit down with an adult beverage, and for 10, 15, 20 minutes, I'll ramble about whatever's on my mind for the week, and encourage the listeners to share their feedback and their contributions, their thoughts. We talk about guns, we talk about crime and gun control and life and current events, politics and theology and reviews and sports, you name it, we'll talk about it. And like I said, it's a little more lighthearted, a little bit outside the typical Armed Lutheran radio format. And just me, an adult beverage, and a topic each week. And it's available now only for Reformation Gun Club members. Plus, we have our monthly online hangouts, which you are welcome to, as a member, you are welcome to participate in. And those are, the next one of those is coming up this weekend. Let me look at the calendar. That is going to be, I believe, yes, it's going to be this coming Friday, June 12th. So that's the next one. And if you join this week, you can get an invite to be a part of it. To learn more and to find out about all the benefits and all the exclusive content that's available to members, check out armedlutheran.us/gun club, or look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. All right, like I said, this week we have another variety show from the entire cast. But before we get to that, did want to mention a couple of things. We've had some really good news on the Second Amendment front in the past week. In California, if you haven't seen this headline, this is fantastic. A federal judge struck down the state's assault weapons ban, calling it unconstitutional. This is fantastic news. U.S. District Judge Roger Benitez, in the case of Miller versus Bonita, said that a ban on weapons like the AR-15 sounds compelling, but it breaks down under closer review. His opinion, it reads like a kind of common sense, the kind of common sense that we talk about here on the show and that you'll hear in many of the pro-gun debates. The AR-15 is not a weapon of war. It's not unusually deadly or uncommon for civilian use. And he points out all the inconvenient stats that we have made, the points that we've made on the show many times. Listen to some of this. From his opinion, this is Judge Benitez. The Heller case, the Heller test. Now remember, Heller was a decision that overturned the gun ban in Chicago and said that it was unconstitutional to prevent you as a citizen from owning a gun in your own home. Heller asks whether a law bans a firearm that is commonly owned by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes. It's a hardware test. Heller draws a distinction between firearms commonly owned for lawful purposes and unusual arms adapted to unlawful uses, as well as arms solely useful for military purposes. Now remember, one of the arguments, then, that this is maybe the dumbest argument that you will hear in the gun rights debate, is the argument made by the anti-gun side. So, well, there are limits to the Second Amendment. I mean, after all, you can't own a bazooka, you can't own a nuclear warhead, and that's maybe the dumbest and least compelling argument, unless you don't really know what you don't have a very good understanding of this issue from the beginning. And Benitez just kind of submarines that whole thinking in this opinion. As applied to the assault weapons ban in California, the Heller test asks, is a modern rifle commonly owned by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes? For the AR-15 type rifle, the answer is yes. The overwhelming majority of citizens who own and keep the popular AR-15 rifle and its many variants do so for lawful purposes, including self-defense at home. That is a fantastic, that is enshrining the argument that we on the pro-gun side have been making for years, in enshrining it in law or in legal precedent. Now, obviously, this is not the end of the road. They're going to keep fighting this. They've made that very clear. But this is an extraordinary opinion. This case is not about extraordinary weapons lying at the outer limits of Second Amendment protection. The banned assault weapons are not bazookas, howitzers, or machine guns. Those arms are dangerous and solely useful for military purposes. Instead, The firearms deemed quote unquote assault weapons are fairly ordinary, popular modern rifles. This is an average case about average guns used in average ways for average purposes. Fantastic, fantastic wording. Absolutely love this. And then he even hits them with the statistics that we repeatedly have shared on the show in debunking. Go back to the 3 episodes where we debunked that crazy Methodist pastor's article about guns, where he trotted out all of the typical cliched arguments against guns. Well, here is the argument that we were making in a very concise form and now enshrined in legal jurisprudence. One is to be forgiven if one is persuaded by news media and others that the nation is awash with murderous AR-15 assault rifles. The facts, however, do not support this. The characterization of a finding as one of fact or law is not controlling. To the extent that that a finding is characterized as one of law, but is more properly characterized as one of fact, or vice versa, substance prevails over form. Hyperbole and facts matter. Federal Bureau of Investigation murder statistics do not track assault rifles, but they do show that killing by knife attack is far more common than murder by any kind of rifle. Boom. That is fantastic. This is, President Biden hardest hit, right? Remember, President Biden-Harris and his party want to ban these weapons. They want to ban the scary assault rifle. And the president's nominee to head the ATF, the Waco bro and former anti-gun lobbyist David Chipman, cannot even define these weapons except to say it's whatever the government says they are, and he wants to ban them. Beta male O'Rourke, for example, said during the 2020 primaries, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15s. And the president even suggested at one point that Beto would be his gun control czar. But Sleepy Joe's forgotten, apparently, and Beto's back to Texas considering a run for governor. Good luck with that. This is a big decision for the gun rights debate, which brings me to the second point of good news for the 2A, and that is new polling that shows that the president's policies on gun control are now underwater and badly underwater. In 2 new polls, one from Quinnipiac, and I don't remember where the other one is, show that close to 50% of those who responded, 49% in one poll and 47% in another, oppose his gun control policies, while support for his policies is down around 35% in both polls. Now, that's fantastic news as well. We're seeing more and more people, more and more average, everyday people buying guns and interested in owning guns and interested in their right to own a gun. Now, that doesn't mean the fight's over. Like I said, we haven't won anything yet. The president still controls both houses of Congress. His lead in the Democrats' control of the Senate is razor thin. So, but if he can keep people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema in line and maybe pick off a few Republican squishes, he can still pass some pretty onerous legislation. But in the case of Miller versus Bonita, this is probably going to get appealed to the Ninth Circuit, and potentially, I think it has a very good chance to ultimately end up in front of the Supreme Court, which means that anything that comes out of the Congress with regards to banning so-called assault weapons is going to get sunk, as long as we've got the 6-3 conservative majority on the court. And that may, I mean, if all things considered, fingers crossed, that may enshrine into legal precedent the unconstitutionality of so-called assault weapon bans. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you to people like the Gun Owners of America and Second Amendment Foundation who fought and made arguments in that case. But don't sit back and watch, though. There's still a lot we need to do. There's a lot that you need to do to get involved. And it's beyond just voting next November. Your senators need to hear from you to reject David Chipman as the next ATF director. We do not need David Chipman, a gun banner and a longtime lobbyist for the gun control movement. We do not need him at the head of the ATF. So make it clear to your congressmen, to your senators, that you oppose any federal gun control legislation like expanded background checks, and go to the ATF website and file a response, a comment on the newly proposed regulations with regards to ghost guns, so-called ghost guns. The comment period for that proposal is open, and we need to flood them with messages in opposition. Let's get 100,000. Let's get 500,000. We were successful in shutting down previous attempts to curtail our rights through this process. Let's do it again. I will include a link in the show notes for you to contact your senators and congressmen, and a link to the ATF's comment page as well. When you do, though, here's a little bit of advice on how to do this. Be polite. Be respectful. Don't threaten them. Don't use invective. As it says in Titus chapter 3, speak evil of no one, avoid quarreling, be gentle, and show perfect courtesy. So be polite and respectful. Avoid hyperbole and cliched answers. You want to make your arguments from facts, from logic, from reason. Avoid the "my rights" arguments. It's one thing to talk about as a group, as we are here together, standing together as Second Amendment supporters. It's one thing to make that argument. It's another to throw that out there as your key argument when you're talking to bureaucrats. Because what we're dealing with here is a bureaucratic government, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Enforcement. They're not elected officials. They don't care about your rights. They only care about affecting the law. So you can make the argument that these proposals are infringements, but don't make that your sole argument, right? Use facts, use logic, explain how this proposed regulation or any proposed legislation would affect you. Those arguments are much more powerful. They're much more persuasive. So go that route and focus on those things so that we can win this fight. Again, look for a link in the show notes for where you can make your voices heard on these issues, and get out there and do that. Get involved. All right, it's time to get the show on the road. That's enough from me today. Sergeant Bill is up first. He's got a new Ballistic Minute, followed by Pastor John Bennett with his new pontification for the week, and we will hear from Mia in 2 weeks. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show, and I will talk to you again next week in episode 270.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I want to give you a quick review of the 2021 Truglo Texas State IDPA Championship. The match was shot on Memorial Day weekend, with the staff shoot on Saturday and most of the competitors shooting on Sunday. The staff shoot was perfect, beautiful weather, late springtime weather in North Texas. It was a little cool in the morning and nice and warm during the afternoons, in the high 70s, low 80s. And then Sunday was a little bit different. We had a little bit of a cold front and a storm front come through the night before, and it was really cloudy and in the mid 50s in the morning, kind of cool. And it warmed up a little bit a few hours later, but it was a little chilly morning. So the match had 13 stages and 195 shooters. It was a pretty technical match with some difficult shots and some difficult activators and moving sequences. which is typical of the Collin County IDPA club, and it was a lot of fun. Some of the difficult stages including an all headshot stage, and there was a mover with 2 targets that had through a port that came down a ramp, and a non-threat, when it hit down at the end of the ramp, would pop up in front of you, which I saw a few people shoot that non-threat. And a standard stage, which was nothing but torture. You shot 4 targets, strong hand only, from about 12 to 15 yards. 1 target was a headshot only. The next 2 were open targets, but they were side by side with a non-threat in front of them, so they were crowded and partially covered. And the 4th target was a tuxedo target. And then you moved up all in one string, and at 7-ish yards, 7 to 9 yards, you shot weak hand only, 2 shots on each one of those, and there was a lot of points down on that stage. Overall, it was a fun match, even though it was difficult, which is normal if you ever come up to North Texas and shoot any of the Collin County IDPA matches, even just their club matches. They like to crank up the difficulty and make them tough, which is a lot of fun, actually. Truglo was the headlining sponsor, and they had great sponsor support. They had some really nice hats that were in the gift bag when you signed in. They had some other sponsors to include some local paramedic EMT type services. I actually picked up a really low-cost defibrillator after the match was over. And the shirt sponsor was Zero Sports. They had some nice jerseys. They had a bunch of really cool T-shirts. I told Ray, the owner, that I was going to buy some of his Sandbagger T-shirts and hand them out at matches to people that I felt needed them. They had a good prize table with lots of stuff. They had several guns they gave away. They had some good food after the match, some barbecue from a local barbecue place. And it wasn't in the middle of the match, it was after the match. So they had snacks and coolers full of bottled water everywhere around the range. And the range was an outstanding facility. That's the Mission 160 range in North Texas here. So overall, it was just a great match. It was a lot of fun. I've shot it several years in a row. It is my local home club, and they do a fantastic job. So if you ever get a chance to come down to Texas on Memorial Day weekend and want to shoot an IDPA match that is probably one of the higher caliber, more difficult matches you'll ever shoot, come check out the Texas State IDPA match sponsored by Truglo, and maybe I'll see you on the range. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Force and a masterclass competitive shooter. You can check out his YouTube videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill. It's time for Pastoral Pontifications with Pastor John Bennett.
Hello and welcome to another segment of Pastoral Pontifications. This is the Pistol Packing Padre, Pastor John Bennett, here to do a little bit of pontificating. But first, these words.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
That's right. Those are the timeless words of wisdom from President Ronald Reagan. May he rest in peace. And we are seeing now more than ever just how true those words are. This past week, we had the release of Fauci's emails, thanks to a FOIA request. And as we take a look at these emails, it's kind of funny to see the media panicking, running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to do whatever they can to protect Fauci's clearly tarnished reputation. Now, if you haven't taken a look at these emails, I'll just give you the highlights. First, as early as January of 2020, he was told that there were genetic markers within the virus indicating the suggestion that the virus was potentially engineered in a lab. But time and time again, he was claiming that this was all a natural evolution of a virus and that had jumped from bats to humans or whatever other critters that they were assuming were the source of the virus. Well, not assuming. The sources that they were straight out lying to us were the cause of the virus. So we have that. We have the flat out lies claiming that this was completely natural, this was evolved, this had nothing to do with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which we know by now that Dr. Fauci and the NIH were funding the projects that were taking place there. The next point, there was an email shortly thereafter where he was responding to some woman about a question regarding masks, and he declared that masks weren't terribly effective because the virus was smaller than the weave of the mask, that it might help prevent droplets from someone who is infected spreading to someone else, but for the uninfected, it was basically useless and pointless. And yet he's been pushing the wearing of the masks, except for at the beginning where he said that, no, we didn't need them because, he just wanted to keep them for all the medical staff and let us lowly sheep die off from the virus. But he made it very clear that he didn't believe his own words. At first, masks are useless. Then masks are absolutely necessary to keep you from dying from this terrible Wu flu. And then in his private emails, oh no, you don't need those things. They're absolutely useless, which we all knew if we had actually bothered to take a look at the research, that yes, the size of this virus was significantly smaller than the weave of the mask. The mask isn't going to do you any good. It's become more or less political theater and nothing else. Then we have the email between himself and his deputy director, which exposes the fact that they were fully aware of and involved in the Wuhan lab's gain-of-function research. And if you watch the hearings where you had Rand Paul questioning Dr. Fauci, oh no, you're completely mistaken, Rand Paul, that we had nothing to do with the gain-of-function research, which, again, flat out, he lied. Just about everything that's come out of Fauci's mouth has been a lie. And to anyone who is paying attention, this should have been perfectly obvious. Any rational thinking human being should have been able to see this. If you remember last July, where he had the great honor of throwing out the first pitch at a Washington Nationals game, there he is on the pitcher's mound wearing his filthy face diaper. And I wouldn't say throwing the first pitch because whatever that was, it certainly wasn't a throw. But then, when he assumed the cameras weren't on him, there you see him sitting with his mask pulled down around his chin, talking to two other individuals who, as far as I know, weren't members of his own household unless he's reliving that old, terrible movie, 3 Men and a Baby. So yes, just about everything that has come out of his mouth has been a lie. And let's face it, the reason for this isn't because he's a quote-unquote health expert, but rather because he's just another overpaid, useless politician. I only wish that Trump would have fired him a long time ago when it was pretty clear that he was incompetent and that his opinions were changing with the wind. But let's face the fact. The government failed. The government did not help anything. Well, let me take that back. The government helped insofar as Trump pushed through the research for the vaccine and the approval for the vaccine. He was instrumental in getting things like respirators and personal protection equipment into the places that they needed to be and so forth. But by and large, if you look at what happened, the government failed. In fact, to take it a step further, the government hurt businesses. They harmed children with the school lockdowns, and we look at how the teachers' unions are still pushing for keeping the schools locked down. But now, when it seems to be that no longer is a political advantageous position, they are suddenly, magically, no surprise to anyone, reversing their decision. We've seen how the government has created a greater disunity in our country. Just how much did the government hurt us? How much of what they did was for our own good? A recent study was released from the University of Louisville, and it found that there was no difference in the rate of spread of the virus when you compared states that had mask mandates to those states that did not have them. Actually, they also found out in this study that the infection rates were higher in areas where lockdowns were the strictest versus areas where the lockdowns weren't as strict or non-existent whatsoever. This study also determined that the masks actually create more health problems. They create problems such as dehydration and skin problems on the face. And for me, myself, I suffer from asthma. Just a few minutes of wearing those stupid things causes my asthma to be aggravated to the point where I need to use my rescue inhaler. It turns out that the health risks caused by the wearing of the masks outweighs any justification for the supposed protection that they provided. Remember that email that Fauci sent out? Oh no, the masks, they won't do anything. Maybe if you're infected, they'll do a little bit to help prevent the spread. We see time and time again how the government, when they try to do things for us for our own good, they cause far more harm than anything else. There certainly has been no reason given in the last year and a half to cause us to really trust the government. This makes me think of what the psalmist declares in Psalm 118. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. We see how those who have been elected and appointed to public office have failed time and time again. Now, sure, there are some out there that are doing an excellent job, but let's face it, by and large, politicians seem to be more concerned these days with preserving their political power than they do for actually doing something beneficial for our country. I'm also reminded of what Martin Luther writes in the Large Catechism concerning the First Commandment. He says, "A God is that to which we look for all good, and in which we find refuge in every time of need." To have a God is nothing else than to trust and believe Him with our whole heart. As I have often said, the trust and faith of the heart alone make both God and an idol. If your faith and trust are right, then your God is the true God. On the other hand, if your trust is false and wrong, then you have not the true God. For these two belong together, faith and God. That to which your heart clings and entrusts itself, I say, is really your God. Now, we have seen throughout the course of human history, especially in the 20th century, how government tried to supplant God. We see this with Marxism. We see this with the various communist movements that took place, the communist revolutions, of how the state became God. The state was the only source of good, even though what they called good was most often malicious actions towards their subjects. We need to place our trust in God and in Him alone. If anything, the experiences of the last year and a half have taught us that God is the only one whom we can trust. In the midst of turmoil, in the midst of disasters, in the midst of pandemics, cling to God. Trust in Him and Him alone. Politicians will continue to fail us. They'll continue to make stupid decisions. They'll continue to make selfish decisions for the purpose of preserving their political influence and lining their pockets. But our God will never do this. He has no ulterior motives. His only desire is for the salvation of our souls, and that He preserve us in faith until He call us home. So trust in Him, and trust in the salvation that has been won for us through the death and resurrection of Christ Jesus our Lord. Well, that is all for this time. If you have any questions, any articles or random subjects you would like me to pontificate about, be sure to send that through the feedback page at armlutheran.us. Christ blessings to you all. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.